My name is Morten. I'm from Denmark and I work in crime prevention, and I specialize in dealing with extremism and violent extremism. I was brought up in a family in a rural place in Denmark. Now it's a national park. I've got two younger siblings. We had a dog, a car, a villa. We never lacked anything. Both of my parents are academics. We have a lot of books in my parents' place. So it was a nice and sound upbringing. When I was in public school, there were two kinds of people. There were the people who had always lived for hundreds of years in the rural place where we were, and then there were the hippies. And the hippies had moved in only 2 generations ago in the 70s. And the hippies had long hair, and they were not as welcome as the farmers' boys. So we already had a bit of rivalry in the rural area. When I was in school, there were the two groups, the farmers' boys and the hippies' boys. And in the beginning it was like a joke, you know, we made fun of each other. And then as we got older, it also spilled over into to knuckle fights in the schoolyard. And as we grew even older, it became a bit more serious, even in the public school. I think at the age of maybe 12, 13, it began dawning on me that we were the outsiders and the others were the insiders. But we were smarter, was what I thought. But we were also looked upon as sort of gypsies by the local community that had hundreds of years of history of living in that place. I felt that the local people in the area where I grew up had a tight connection to each other over generations. And since they were also the shop owners and they had the workshops, they had all the farms, and they were all over the place, I felt singled out. Oh, he's got long hair. Oh, he's wearing funny clothes. And so did the rest of the crew I was in. So going to school was rather easy for me, maybe too easy, because when I had done my assignments, the others were still working on them. So I would have like maybe half an hour out of every hour where I had nothing to do, especially after the age of 12, because up till the age of 12 I had a class teacher who knew that I was bright. So every time I had finished one assignment, she would just bring me the next one, and eventually she would just show me the place in the cupboard where I could go and get more assignments, so I could just keep working. This meant that when I was in 6th grade, I was doing 9th grade stuff, and then she got another job and I got another teacher. So in 7th grade, I had to do 7th grade things with the other kids, and this meant that I was awfully bored. And being bored in school, you start making up your own challenges. So I was like, okay, now I'm bored, I never have any homework because I'm always done way ahead of time. So when I got home, I started picking locks. I started producing firecrackers out of normal fireworks. I started finding ways of getting projectiles to fly through the air by different means, making firebombs for fun and to challenge myself. I also started doing burglaries in holiday homes, but without smashing stuff. I just wanted to know that I could pick the lock, I could get in, I could leave no trace, and I could get out and lock the door behind me, which I found really interesting and challenging. So when I was 12, I joined a political party, and I started, I think the first thing they sent me was the full Das Kapital by Marx, which is like 1,200, 1,700 pages of gibberish. And especially when you're 12, you know, I didn't have any shelf to put the different theories on. I just read it and I was like, oh, this is right, without actually thinking about what I was reading. And then I started going to meetings, meeting like every week or sometimes once a month, but then it would be like a longer meeting during a weekend. I was very much into, you know, the EU trying to tell us that we could eat colored or, you know, food dye, as that was called. They were using food dye in the products, and we thought it was wrong. So how can we go and protest against this? And we made some activism locally by coloring or giving makeup to a pig's head. We bought a pig's head and we would put makeup on. We would serve blue and green sausages to people. You know, they weren't not healthy, they were just colored in a different way than what would perhaps give you an appetite. So we could tell people about what is this and why are we against it. And sometimes you could go to courses and have a specific course on rhetoric, or a specific course on socialism 101. And you would go with a lot of young people, from my age at the point when I was like 13, 14, and then up to 20, 25. So we would be a lot of people together, and of course there were girls and there were drinks, and I think in the beginning that was definitely why I joined. It was my cause, but it was also a way of getting to know other people in other parts of the country, and particularly getting to know girls, and getting away from my parents so I could also have some drink. When I was in the legal youth group of a legal party, I felt at home at first. I quickly advanced to become the local leader of the group. So when I was aged 15, I was interviewed by newspapers and stuff, because here's a young leader of the local group, he disagrees with the real politicians from his own party, and let's hear what he has to say. So I got a lot of time on that account. But then going to the year meetings with the real politicians, because now I was of higher rank, they didn't listen. They didn't hear me. I could scream and yell and they weren't listening. So I felt that they were betraying me. Now looking back, I can see that I was the one going even further left, and they were sort of stuck where they were. But for me, they were the ones moving right. You know how things are relative? You're in one train and there's another train next to you. Now who's moving and who's not? It's hard to tell. And definitely at this age, I couldn't tell. So I was actually the one moving further left. And I ended up stealing 150 members of the legal political party, using their own stamps and their own letters, and sending out, I'm not gonna be in this group anymore, letters that people could just take out the box and send back to me, and I would make sure that they joined the new group that was even further left and was independent of political parties. Now this new group only lived for like a year in total, and then we joined a group that was even further left and solely activistic. But since I think 2000 it hasn't existed. But looking back, and also that's what the history people tells me, is that this was one of the most well-spoken groups on the extreme left wing that they've ever encountered. All the explanations were there, all the justifications were in place. Well, we are using violence to break the monopoly of the state, because the state has the monopoly of using violence. We think the state is wrong, so we use violence against the state. We use violence against neo-Nazis because they started it. And we had a lot of good explanations for why we did different illegal stuff. I could go back to doing activism, which was what I wanted to do. And then the activism, at first it was, of course it was illegal, but it wasn't violent activism. We went on the Women's International Day, the 8th of March, we went out and we dressed up all the male statues in women's clothing, particularly women's underwear. And then we would be running around and be chased by police because we were doing vandalism, basically. We weren't destroying stuff, but it's seen upon as vandalism. And I found that it was really interesting getting chased by police, because I knew the city better than they did. I could disappear everywhere, and they needed to bring their cars, so yeah. And that bit was fun. Then it evolved into the anti-fascist fight. So going from being a political activist into having just one narrative and one issue I was going for is actually what happened to me. So from being 12 and having a broad perspective on politics to having a more narrow socialist perspective to have an even narrower anti-fascist ideology, if you can call it an ideology at all, because being anti-fascist is adhesing yourself to fascism. So you're using violence, which is a fascist tool, against people that you perceive as fascist. You know, it doesn't make sense to me now, but it definitely did at the time, because I felt that they were the threat, and we were the only ones who would stand up to the threat, because the people in power, they didn't care. They just wanted to divide and conquer. So we've got the left wing, we've got the right wing, let them battle it out, you know, and we'll be in power. That was the perception that led to, okay, we need to do stuff. If not us, who? And if not now, when? We couldn't show our faces at demonstrations because we knew that later on in the demonstration we would go and do some illegal stuff. So we would be masked in demonstrations. We also wore battle clothes. So we went to the military surplus store to get combat pants and either bomber jackets or leather jackets that you could have weapons and stuff in where it didn't show. And all the time we were prepared to either use violence or to be attacked. And you had the expectation of violence everywhere you went. So I was very afraid all the time. So we dressed similarly as an army or police would do. We dressed similarly as a uniform. And this, it's like having your spine reinforced, because look at this, I'm not alone, they're all like me. Biker gangs would do it, they would put on their leather vests. It's a way of showing this is where I belong, and if you mess with me, you mess with all of us. And it was sort of the only thing that could keep my fear on a level where it wasn't detrimental. We would plan to go with the demonstration, and then at a certain point we would break out and attack some point of attack or some people that we knew that we could get to. And I was the coordinator between Copenhagen and Aarhus, which is the second largest city. So, and I couldn't tell these things on the phone, so I would have to go physically to Copenhagen to arrange if we were doing something, and they would come over and arrange with me if they were doing something. And that was really exciting, because it was like toy soldiers, you know. It was all the things you see on TV, and we were just doing it, and it felt like a cool, you know, it was It was an extra added thing that, wow, now I'm doing something really exciting and it's really illegal, and I'm just in opposition to the rest of society. Because even the others that would call themselves left-wing, they weren't left-wing enough for me, you know. They were moderates, and I couldn't use that, you know. We need to be all the way out here, or the revolution will never happen. We need to be all the way out here, or the fascists will have too easy or too much elbow space, and we need to keep them as a small contained group. And if we can use violence as one of the means, we'll have to do that, you know. So we were battling police, and police were just faceless to us because they had the riot gear on, so they were like robots or machines, you know. They weren't people. We couldn't see them as people, and I bet they couldn't see us as people either because we wore masks. Then I remember one time when we managed to break through police lines and get to a meeting room, and it was just a bunch of old geezers sitting in there having coffee, talking about how bad they thought of immigrants and the left wing. And I remember throwing a rock through the window at them, and it was like a surge of adrenaline. I don't think if I had stood against one of these old guys, you know, I don't think I would have hit him, because he's just a sad person. Because being at home wasn't that fun. I had my room, of course, full of posters of stuff. I had a cupboard with all my smoking gear. I was smoking a lot of weed, but also with different chemicals for producing explosives that I thought, well, one day I'll build something out of this. So I was stealing it at school. But being at home was like being in a confined space. You know, I felt I can't move here because my parents were living so far away from everything. So I tend to stay in the big cities and to stay over with people and have my sort of city identity. And then when I came home, I would have a nice time with my parents, cooking for them or doing the dishes and being a nice boy, even though I had the mohawk and the makeup on, and they never, ever thought that I would use violence because I wasn't that sort of person. So they saw me as one thing, and I think in the city I was a different person. My parents definitely noticed that I had a change of style, because I went from, to say it in a different way, I was checking out a lot of different subcultures. At one point I was wearing reversed crosses, like a Satanist, but without actually believing in any religion, just because I was listening to a lot of hardcore metal music. Then at one point I was really drunk and we thought, wow, a mohawk would be cool. And then I had the longest mohawk with 5 spikes, and it was like yay high, and that was fun, and I dyed it black. And then I got a leather jacket instead of the bomber jacket, and I thought, wow, punk is kind of cool because you really get noticed. But they didn't comment on it, you know. They let me be. They talked to me definitely, but they didn't touch on these subjects. I wasn't aware of the extreme right wing until I was like 10, 12 years old, when we had some murders in Scandinavia. Right wing people murdering left wing people, right wing people murdering immigrants, beating up immigrants on the streets, skinheads doing Nazi rallies. And I'm from a family where I was taught that Nazism is just wrong, and being a neighboring country to Germany, we know that Nazism is wrong. And seeing young people engaging in this and doing the same stuff that Hitler's troops were doing in the 30s. My dad is teaching history, so I knew a lot about Nazism. I felt I had to do something, because what I could see is nobody's doing anything, so I definitely wanted to do something about this. So it went from just doing politics on a broader level to attract people to the left wing instead of the right wing, into going directly at the right wing, particularly after an attack. There was an attack in Copenhagen where a socialist, and he was a father and a husband, he received a letter bomb that killed him. And the letter bomb was sent by the neo-Nazis. And this gave a sense of, okay, it's now or never. We really need to do something against this, because we can't let the situation just unfold, because we'll end up dead. Extremism is always all over the media. So, and at the time we didn't have the internet. So what I had was a newspaper, and then the tabloid newspapers, front pages when you pass shops. And that's basically the information I had. Then I started receiving magazines from the extreme left wing, where there was one called Cut the Crap, and that was made by the Anti-Fascist Action. And it just took away anything I didn't need to know and collected newspaper articles about what I needed to know. So what I needed to know was this and that about the extreme right wing, this and that about Shell and McDonald's and stuff, and this and that about the labor unions. So all of the rest of society was crap, so it was cut away from the news that I got. Especially when I was small, I really looked up to my dad. And he taught me a lot of stuff about history, and I was listening. When I came of age, I began to be more like my peers in school, and particularly the boys 2 years older than me. So my friends' older brothers. I never had my own older brother, so I only had my friends' older brothers. When working with young people, as I do now, I definitely see similarities to my own history. This transitional phase of going from being your parents' kid to being yourself, and in the end being part of something to help you form your identity. That's definitely something I see in the kids. And they want to be seen, just like I wanted to be seen, not just by my parents, but I wanted the whole world to see me, to recognize me. And you know, I see that in all kids. And if I don't see it, I'm actually concerned, because why is this kid not trying to get the attention? You know, and particularly as the world is now, because it's so attention-based that if you're not looking for attention, the world might pass you by. So definitely, in a search of identity, I think young kids today could also join groups like I did, or do stuff that I did, to form themselves. The transition from going from a legal and legitimate democratic party and to joining an activistic and partly illegitimate group was because no one was listening to me. I felt overheard by the real-life politicians, the parliamentarians. They weren't listening, and I was thinking, I'm the young blood here. You know, listen to me. I'm your future, and they didn't listen, and I got really, really upset that no one was listening to what I believed. And then I moved into a group where I could take it to the streets and just show people openly, these are my beliefs, this is what I stand for. And I could fight the system, I could fight the power physically. I could physically do something, as opposed to in politics, where everything takes a lot of time. And I had this I had a sense of urgency, you know, being a young person and experiencing the death of a girlfriend. You know, you suddenly realize, wow, life might be short. You know, I might not have time to do everything. So I need to do a lot of change right now. It's urgent. And I think that was the sentiments. I knew all along that I was right and everyone else was wrong. And I knew it for a fact because when I was with the group and we were discussing and debating things, we all agreed all the time. And when you don't get any opinions from anyone else, that becomes the truth. So we had the truth, it was ours. And we would like to give it out, but you would have to agree with us.